There's a very big disparity between a London-based liberal outlook-in head of the organisation and the actual reality on the ground.
Hi, I'm Jane.
My name's Sarah and I run the Women's Institute Declaration Twitter account.
I'm Veronica.
And I'm Bex.
And we are
Insightful Sisters.
Hi, everyone. So tonight we're really lucky we've got Sarah and Veronica, both from WI, their virtual group. Sarah is a coordinator for WI in the Midlands, and Veronica is involved in the WI virtual group and does various things behind the scenes. So we're very, very lucky to have you here tonight, ladies.
Could you tell us, how long have you been a member? And I mean, obviously this topic aside, have you seen the WI change in general over the period that you've been attending?
Been in the Women's Institute for about 10 years. So when I moved from London to the West Country, I joined my local group, and that was a nice instant friendship group of women. And then about 3 years ago, I became aware that they were defining, getting into trans women or women, and it actually caused me to leave the WI over that, because I didn't want to be paying subscriptions to organisation who espoused that ideology that I didn't agree with. And I left the Women's Institute over that and joined the Women's Rights Network.
So I joined in 2012. I'd moved to where I currently live, and I didn't really know anyone, so I thought it'd be a good way to meet women and make some friends. And I've definitely done that. I've got some great friends through the WI.
Yeah.
So the biggest development, I think, has been over COVID, when they then started having these virtual groups. And I think that's been a really positive way forward. It makes it a lot more accessible to women, people that may not want to go out. Not everyone wants to go out on a dark January night to their local group, but you can log on online. And if you're a wheelchair user or something like that, you might have access issues. Again, going online can be a lot easier for people. I think that's been a really real positive thing that they've done, and a huge advancement. But they still need to really support the local groups.
It's obvious just hearing how you talk about the WI that this organisation is something you take great pride in, and it means a lot to you, and rightly so. Do you remember when you first became aware of this gender topic within the WI itself, or the inclusion of trans women?
Yes. On Facebook, there are a couple of groups that are more social, not official Women's Institute groups, but more Women's Institute members chatting about various things. And I became aware that they were promoting Trans Day of Visibility and promoting the Trans Women are Women mantra. And I made a sort of mild, I'm always quite careful what I say on social media, and I made a mild comment about how we can't pretend that movement doesn't attract a lot of violent male activists as well, because it's not said often enough that it's all under one trans umbrella, which is nonsensical, because an adolescent girl who's unhappy about puberty and becoming a girl has got nothing in common with an autogynephile or transvestite. And I tried to say something about violent male activists in this area and got a bit shouted down. There's a group of women in the WI who are quite high profile, who are quite keen to assert their progressive credentials and virtue signal about that. And I got shouted down a bit. And then I was annoyed the next day to see that the moderators had edited that conversation to really skew it and give an unfair impression and leave comments that were in favour of the idea that trans women are women. And I went and talked to my WI about it and raised my concerns with them. And they were sympathetic. It's a big group. They were sympathetic and agreed with me, but I was the only one who left over it. And I think that's quite typical, that most WI groups, probably quite reasonably, reckon that they're probably not going to have to deal with a trans-identifying man turning up. And so they'll just carry on. They'll carry on paying their subs and having fun. It means a lot to them. All the social groups and the sisterhood they get from it, it means a lot to them. And they reckon that they can just take the risk that they're unlikely to be challenged by a trans-identifying man turning up and wanting to join. So they'll just carry on enjoying themselves. Whereas I felt more strongly, as a matter of principle, I didn't want to go on giving money to an organisation that was insisting that trans women are women and could be allowed to join the WI. And it was when I was invited to join the Women's Rights Network, I became a bit more aware of the whole issue and told them what had happened to me. And I think it's just one of those situations where there's 175,000 women in the WI, And most groups rub along quite happily, especially some of the more traditional, or rural, or probably slightly conservative outlook groups who are happy doing their own thing, who are probably blissfully unaware of this whole problem that's grown up with the people who run and manage the WI having become very involved in identity politics and getting on board with the trans women are women mantra. And that's been something that's been rumbling on for ages, only resolved by we thought, by the Supreme Court ruling.
I remember quite vividly walking back from a pub. We'd gone for a social night out to a local pub, and they'd brought in this self-ID policy, and that had replaced a policy where you had to ask quite intimate questions that no one really wanted to ask. They were difficult. You don't want to ask people, how do you live as a woman? Or, I mean, it's a rubbish question, and I'd like to say at the time I was sort of being kind. So we were just sort of happy to go along with it. Because deep down, you knew that these were men who thought they were women, and you sort of believed the lie that they had lots of problems, and it was very, life was hard for them. And then I found out that maybe that wasn't quite true, and it wasn't as hard for them as you thought. And at that point, when I read the WI's policies, I realised we were being sold a lie.
So just before Christmas, the WI CEO, Melissa Green, had announced with sadness and regret that from April 26th, trans women aren't going to be able to join the WI anymore. Could you tell us about that announcement, and what were your feelings at the time when you heard it?
My first reaction was, that's really good. It's a Christmas miracle almost. And then I read the statement, and I thought the language in it was very biased towards men. They're still focusing on men. And then it had some sneaky things in there as well. And it said, our strong belief is that transgender women are women, that they will remain part of that family. And then the thing that really concerns me is that they've put, and I'm quoting from it, we will be launching a national network of local WI sisterhood groups, which will offer monthly opportunities for all people, including transgender women, to come together to socialise, learn from each other, and share their experiences of living as women. But obviously that needs to include men as well, and it doesn't mention men, it uses the word people, and it's very clear what the WI is trying to do, and I believe that they're trying to circumvent the Equality Act.
You can imagine how jubilant we were when the Supreme Court clarified that women means biological women. And we thought that then that would be game over for them with this silly game. And here we are 8 or 9 months later, and they've only just made that ridiculous announcement about their sadness and regret. One of us said it was like somebody announcing a death. The tone of it, like somebody announcing war. Oh, with terrible sadness and regret, we can no longer include men in the Women's Institute. So we thought good. And because of the delays of implementing the EHRC guidance, here we all still are.
Can you tell us a bit about the structure of the WI? I mean, is there a feedback process? Had there been discussions or votes prior to this statement being put out?
So it's a 3-tier structure. There's local groups, which you could just call like branches. Most of them, the vast majority of them, there's over 6,000 of them, meet face to face. And then you get some online ones, so they call them virtual WI. So that could be women from all over the world meeting and being WI members. And then above that is federation, and federations and local branches are all staffed by volunteers. There's normally at federation level a part-time employee who will help run with the admin, because a lot of these have large, we're talking thousands of pounds worth of turnover. And at the top, you have the National Federation of Women's Institutes, and they will act as giving guidance and advice. They produce the policies, and they also run, which is quite a big part of the WI, is they do an annual campaign, and they will run that. There's never been a vote. Well, there was a vote back in the 90s about the WI becoming mixed sex and joining with the Village Hall Association, but that was rejected. And since then, there's never been a vote. The Constitution clearly states that membership is only open to women, and its charitable objects are that it's a educational charity for women and girls.
So how well are members kept in the loop about the decision, initially to include trans women, and now the decision to return to objectives and be single sex. How well are you consulted?
We weren't consulted at all. There was no vote. The WI, the National Federation, will claim that this has been happening for 40 years, so since the 1980s. I find this really hard to believe because in the 1980s, no one called trans-identifying men trans women. And then in about 2015, they said they're going to stop asking questions and basically allow self-ID. They claim that this was what the members wanted and there's a lot of support for it. But I've also heard from a very well-placed woman that they know that the members are very unhappy with this.
Inside of groups themselves, what was your feeling in the run-up to all of this or during all of this? Because a lot of women who attended maybe do have gender critical views. A lot of gender critical women do see it as a natural woman's space. I mean, it's in the name. Is this discussed in local meetings? Does the topic come up, if not from leadership, from members?
So I can only talk from my own personal experience and also from some of the members who I'm in touch with in my virtual group. And it's very divisive when it's being brought up. There's an unofficial Women's Institute Facebook group. And if you mention anything there that's gender critical, you're likely to get kicked out and removed from the group. You're called a bigot, transphobe. This is all quite regular. This all happens in the unofficial WI Facebook group. And any kind of discussion they try and shut it down as quickly as possible.
One thing that we'd like you to talk to us about is the WI resolutions. And this is a way, it seems, to draw awareness from the wider organisation and maybe breach some of those gaps. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, this is a really worthy thing the WI have always done. They have a resolutions process, by which they mean every year, any member in any WI can raise an idea that she thinks is an issue worthy of the WI getting behind and investing their resources in, making a national campaign. So people submit individual resolutions. It goes through a process. At county level, somebody will coordinate it, and there's a deadline to submit them all. And then they all go up to national, who look at them. And in the past, there have been some really good campaigns like microplastics. I think even Keep Britain Tidy might have been a WI campaign. Sometimes they're to do with nature or social things. But there have been some really good high-profile campaigns. And this is where the WI as a women's institution has got some teeth in being a campaigning institution. So some of us who had become slightly disillusioned with what the WI were doing found each other on social media, I think, and gradually connected with each other. And because we're interested in women's health and women's sports and women's rights, we actually formed our own Women's Institute, and you can have a virtual one now, so geography is no barrier. And we are a group of women now from Cumbria to Cornwall who have been officially adopted by a county, and we've been set up as a proper WI. So this is really great. We can have our monthly meetings, and because some of us are quite well connected, we've had some brilliant speakers like human rights lawyers, and so we can now take part in the resolutions process. But this year, I was one of the people selected to take part in the shortlisting, and any member can apply, and I think it's fairly randomly selected. Sometimes it's to make sure they get a good representation across the country, but it meant that I was able to really observe the whole process close up, and over 100 delegates took part in the process of discussing the 30 or so submissions and whittling it down to a shortlist of ideally about 4 or 5. And we were sent the long list, and the aim is to whittle it down to this short list. And then what happens is that all members are asked to individually vote on the 4 or 5 selected, and eventually it goes through a process whereby it goes to an annual meeting, and it normally comes down to 1 or 2, and then that gets the whole weight of the WI behind it, and they put a lot of money and time and resources into lobbying and making it into a campaign. So I think this process is flawed because the resolutions had been edited, again, by the National Federation of WI Public Affairs team. Now, I understand why they might want to make it consistent format to help people looking at 30 resolutions. So they try and get them into a consistent format, what the proposer's intention is, what the background is, what the current situation is, points to consider. And I understand why they would want to try and emphasise those campaigns that could have legs, things that would be appropriate for the WI to campaign on given the structure, what women could campaign on individually, what sort of things we could do. I understand that. But they have introduced, inevitably, an equality and inclusion filter. And then the public affairs team also rate each of the 30 resolutions green, amber, or red. Now, I can see how some lend themselves more readily to being useful campaigns and why some would be rated green, amber, or red. But a flaw with the whole process is that the first 4 rated green, which means strongly worded with a lot of potential, get the lion's share of the discussion. So most of the morning is given over to discussion of the 4 that they have already decided have the most potential. So the first 4 were rated green, and that concerned things like access to fertility health care, public toilets, homelessness, and a children's scheme. 13 were rated amber, weaker, less appropriate for the WI, and that covered a vast range of topics, including healthy food, breast cancer screening, ME, phones and children, femicide, another toilet one, nature, and a really great one about teaching women how to check their vulva health, which was a good one that actually made the shortlist in the end, so that was good. And the last 13, designated red, poorly worded or unsuitable, covered another whole range of different subjects. And the meeting is chaired by the public affairs team, and the morning session consists of them presenting the ones that they've already decided are the most suitable. And that gets a lion's share of the discussion. So frustratingly, some of the others further down the list got scant attention. The outcome's heavily conditioned by that rating system that I think makes the result a bit preordained. And it sees other ideas that are worthy of development that could be good with a bit of work passed over. But the main thing that worried us is the extent of their editing of the submissions and putting them through that EDI filter. And we seem doomed to have an annual list of very safe resolutions about toilets, litter, health and food and nature on repeat that aren't particularly women's issues. So they're all important topics, but they're not addressing the serious challenges that women face in a way that you would think the Women's Institute would be more likely to do.
So the other thing that you had mentioned there was these sisterhood groups. And in particular, that's been pushed by Angie Leach, a lead from Surrey, hasn't it? I mean, how are you feeling about that approach?
I don't see how a charitable, an organisation such as the WI, where its charitable objects are quite clear, they're to benefit women and girls. I don't see how running mixed sex groups fits in with the charitable objects. Obviously spent time and effort already doing it. And this is an organisation that, it's not poor, but it shouldn't be spending members' money on things outside its charitable objects.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that they're doing this with no sort of confirmation. Part of me does wonder as well if they're showing deep down that if they were to ask members, that the answer would not be in support.
It's strange in that you've got those 3 layers, and you've got the National Federation claiming to speak for the other 2 layers without doing any formal way of pulling in information or getting ideas.
I mean, they will say that they get information from federations, and there's all sorts of little subcommittees and groups and stuff within the WI. But the reality is they are stacked with people. A lot of them have got trans rights activists like Angie Leach. And it takes a lot to stand up to these people and say, I don't think you're right. I think this is wrong. When I've got the Times article, and Leach agreed that the new rules preventing trans women joining the WI were going to be hateful. So when you've got someone in a position of authority saying that, you as a member, it's very difficult to then turn around and say, I disagree with that. I think, why should women not be allowed to have their own space? And why is women wanting their own space considered to be hateful?
Well, I would agree with you. I wonder as well if part of the issue has been that the current leadership of WI has been trying to shake off a sort of old-fashioned look. Do you think that's got something to do with this?
I think that's a huge part of it. I think they've kind of, if you go onto YouTube, you can find Victoria Wood skits with Richard E. Grant in talking about the WI and this whole Jam and Jerusalem thing. And they managed to shake it off a bit with the Calendar Girls. But again, that was quite a few years ago now. And I think they're sort of struggling to find their place within a modern society. And rather than saying, we're an educational charity, this is what we stand for, we support women's rights. It's a very powerful campaign organisation, but they haven't. They've just kind of blown with the wind and latched onto what they thought would be seen as being easy. And, they've described themselves as a progressive organisation. But, I'm in a rural location, and when I meet up with, every now and again, you'll see, you go to a big federation meeting, and there are lots of women from, small rural WIs, and they wouldn't describe themselves as progressive. There's a very big disparity between a London-based liberal outlook-in head of the organisation and the actual reality on the ground. And National will claim that they go round and they talk to people, but really, how are they going to get around 6,000 different groups every year? Or, Canvas support. Some of these groups even struggle getting online. The WI during the COVID pandemic had to put a guide out to try and get people to use Zoom. And it took them months to do it. They didn't do it quickly. And it's just because of how, a lot of older people aren't that keen on using new technology, and they want that face-to-face interaction.
There's a huge disconnect between the leadership of the WI, who've become heavily involved in identity politics and are very keen on their equality and diversity and inclusion policies, and I think have been advised by Stonewall and have written these policies in quite a covert way. There hasn't been very much open discussion about this, because we've had to go back looking at policies and when they change and trying to work out what happened when. And they are very much on board with that. Probably safe in the knowledge that the vast majority of members are blissfully unaware and doing their own thing. And it feels dishonest to me that they are taking member subscriptions and money and using it to advance a sort of social crusade about a social movement that they espouse that probably most members of the WI wouldn't be happy with. Having said that, there is quite a strong contingent of progressive women, especially in some of the more urban centres, and there are WIs who are very keen on promoting all this sort of thing, but they're probably not very representative of the vast majority of members. So there's a huge disconnect between what's happening at national level, and then their policies get disseminated down to county level, and they run all the groups under them at county level. But there's not always a lot of communication between the admin at county level and the individual WIs who run pretty much autonomously.
I'm fascinated to ask if you're aware of any impact that this has had on memberships. Are women leaving over this, or has it been a net benefit to the WI? I mean, are they boosting numbers by allowing in men, essentially?
I hear horror stories of groups where they've had men coming in to tell them about their lived experience as a woman, and they go into quite a lot of quite revolting details, and I just can't help but think that, if they're going somewhere, these women that's not what they're going to a WI for. They don't want to hear about a man's fetish, and it's just going to put women off. I have had anecdotal evidence of women saying they've turned up and there was a man there and they said, no, that's not for me, and they left. I just can't see how it would be a net benefit.
Can I ask you about policies? Because when we discussed doing this, you sent me some of the WI's policies and I had a little look at them. And again, the thing that you've said about the difference between sort of a London-based metropolitan progressive organisation and then this sort of largely rural group of women attending meetings was quite striking. I mean, the policies are completely full, aren't they? Intersectionality, lots and lots of stuff about transgender rights.
Yes, there's over a page on gender reassignment and non-binary.
Tell us a bit about what's in those policies.
So the policies, I believe they're very, very disingenuous in their wording. The one from 2021 states, it lists the protected characteristics, and then it says, though the WI lawfully restricts membership to women only. But that was blatantly false, because when I wrote to the WI in early 2023, they said that they weren't relying on the Equality Act for the single-sex exemption. And at that point, I said, well, I'm going to go through your EDI policy then. And lo and behold, it got changed quite rapidly, and that comment got taken out. So it just lists the protected characteristics. And then there is no, whereas most of the protected characteristics are given a bit of an explainer, sex is completely omitted. And then it says, being a transgender woman is a protected characteristic under the Equality Act 2010. Being a transgender woman includes the permanent decision to live as a woman, and there is no legal requirement to have had gender reassignment surgery or other medical intervention. And I believe that's worded in such a way that members are led to believe, because when you don't understand the Equality Act and how it works, you would think this is a special group of people that are afforded extra protections under it, when that is not the case. And I believe that wording is such that a lay member, or just an ordinary member that's busy, hasn't got time, and trusts the National Federation of Women's Institutes to be accurate when they're describing the law, that paragraph, I think, is deliberate to conflate sex and the protected characteristic of gender reassignment and to confuse members.
Yeah, I particularly loved the glossary. The glossary is fabulous. Hate things where they seemed to be a duplication but trying to be different, and there were lots in here that I thought, well, how do you tell the difference between this and this? So I think there was pansexual. So the pansexual, this refers to a person whose romantic sexual attraction to others is not limited by the sex assigned at birth, gender, or gender identity. Could we not just say bisexual for those people and just let them choose?
That's what I was going to say, was bisexual doesn't appear, and it took ages. I don't know if the one you've got, but the one I'm looking at the moment doesn't have lesbian in it either.
Oh, no, this one does have lesbian.
I've followed a more modern one.
I've followed a current link.
Right.
And it does have lesbian on. But I was also interested because obviously those amongst us who like policy, we like to look at bits of stuff like this. So it says that the next review date for this policy is January 2025. So this policy is still up and it's still not been updated. And there's also a disclaimer at the beginning of these policies saying that the policies are currently under review. So it's a bit of a muddle, isn't it, on their site?
It's a complete muddle, yes. Yeah.
So what are your spies telling you is going on behind the scenes?
I think they genuinely think that these are a vulnerable, oppressed minority that we need to help. And I think if I let myself think that, I have a kind of view of them, that they think they're doing the right thing, as opposed to their willingly knowing what they're doing. But I just think I wouldn't be surprised if someone has a relative or a child and they are just clinging on to this. I always think of Helen Joyce and what she said about the people with trans-identifying children, and they will be the Japanese soldiers.
Yeah. I wondered as well, you've got your CEO, Melissa Green. Melissa's background is in organisations that really are focused on young people. She's worked for an organisation that looks after babies. She's worked for Scouting and she's been involved in a fostering organisation. So that is her background, all in the third sector. So she's gone from one third sector organisation to another, which means that she will be doing a lot of third sector training. And we know that the third sector, that is the charity sector, we know that that's heavily influenced by Stonewall. And she's bringing that experience. I mean, possibly she was hired to try and bring in younger members. I just wondered if Melissa Green herself has that influence.
So the change of policy to self-ID came in before Melissa Green was appointed as General Secretary. And then the role changed and she became CEO. But it does appear that it went from being something in the background to massively promoted. So now the NFWI goes to London Pride. It went to Brighton Pride. There's merchandise. It feels that this is now like an intrinsic part of being in the WI, is this celebration of pride. And yeah, it just is very strange how quickly it's taken over.
The members that have joined you via your X account or via your other social media account with the virtual reality WI, What sort of stories are they bringing to you?
So we've had a few ladies that, they might have been bullied online. We've had people that are just glad that they're still in the WI, but they feel that they can vent and they can, if they're worried about things or if they want to bring something up in their local WI, and they're not quite sure how to do it, there's always a bit of chat in the WhatsApp and people are kind of, wargaming their approaches. And the other thing which we've done, and I think this has been really positive, is we've put in WI campaigning resolutions, and we did one on female incontinence and based it off a talk that Elaine Miller did to Sex Matters.
We wrote a lot of research and wrote a resolution that would be a really good campaign, and we focused on the fact that it would be an easy to achieve campaign because so much of it is about teaching women techniques to manage their own urinary and bladder health. It affects 20 million women, we said, and there's a bit of stigma around it and how easy it would be to address some women's problems in this area. And we thought this would be a really good campaign. And we submitted that. And to our horror, when it appeared on the long list, it had been quite substantially changed. They talked about people instead of women. They'd taken out some of the women focus. So we made an official complaint about them having changed and removed information and weakened the points that we made. And they included information that contradicted our findings. Like we talked about how prolapses are often picked up in women's examinations, and that could be a good pathway to raise awareness and get women referred to physiotherapy programs where they could improve their health in that area. Because if it's left too late, it can lead to the sort of problems and prolapses that lead to things like that mesh implant scandal. We were horrified they didn't come back to us to discuss it. They just changed it and made it a bit less woman-focused and a bit more general, thereby undermining it so much that it didn't really get anywhere. So we made a complaint, and as a result of that, I believe the form was changed. And so this year, they did say that they reserve the right to edit and adjust and change submissions a bit. So it's a bit more overt that they can do it, but it caused quite a rumpus. And the county coordinator who coordinated the resolutions for the county that we're affiliated to actually resigned over it, because it was such an underhand way of weakening our resolution in the way that we felt made it less woman-focused.
It was a really good for us, a really good way of exposing just to us as a group how captured the organisation is.
I mean, frankly, that is quite disgusting. You've got an opportunity to spread information relevant to an older group of ladies, and it's vetoed. It's just terrible, that, isn't it?
They would say that, well, members voted, but the reality was it wasn't given a fighting chance. It would have been an excellent resolution as well, because it was all about pelvic floor exercises, and it does affect younger women of childbearing age and women who have had children and has links into postnatal depression. So we were aiming it as well, not just older women, but women who have just had children and babies. So for it just to be completely, it felt like it was not given a chance at all. It's quite frustrating. And then last year we did one on surrogacy.
We thought we'd choose another issue that's topical and of great interest and affects women's rights and women's health, and thinking about the current egg harvesting and that sort of targeting of young women. So we, again, wrote a really good resolution, we thought, and got lots of expert advice, and we made it very much from the perspective of the child. So we wanted to make it a child-focused one, because we thought that so much we hear about with surrogacy is often framed as a gay rights issue, gay men's rights to have a baby. There's a lot about that whole agenda that's quite unsavoury. And so we wanted to write something that was very much focused on the rights of the child. And again, we wrote a really strong resolution. But the only two comments were things from people who didn't really understand what we had been getting at, because our resolution had been changed a bit, and said, oh, it's a bit insensitive to anybody going through IVF, completely misunderstanding the points we were making about international surrogacy and egg harvesting and that sort of thing. So really, the whole process is rather shrouded in secrecy. And our one was rated amber.
Yeah, I mean, the Women's Institute has the potential to be a huge educator and informer for its members and for women as a whole. It's a strange direction that the WI has gone in.
There's the suggestion in various media that this could be make or break for the WI, because creating these sisterhood groups, which your CEO seems to be in favour of, would potentially split the organisation. What are your thoughts about that?
I don't think there will be enough of the sisterhood groups to split the WI. I think that there will be a lot of WIs that are just pleased that they've sort of dodged a bullet on the whole thing, and you'll get some that are very fervent. But the true believers will probably leave, because if they're seeing that, they will see it as a two-tier membership. So they will have, you can be a member or you can join a sisterhood group. So you're not going to be able to have voting rights. You probably won't be able to put things like campaigns through. I'm just surmising now because we don't know what it's going to look like. But it's almost, it's a bit offering. It's sort of like, it's not really what you would want, surely. And it's, people want to join and be special. They're kind of not going to be special if any man can join.
What should the WI look like? What does the WI do really well? And what should the future of the WI be?
So the WI, it does really well. It does women's education really well. And we know we've got problems in the UK with childhood obesity and just the general cooking skills. You think that a group like the WI could really get in there and do educational things, drop-in groups. And I know it's not always that straightforward because people are busy, but it could have a real positive impact on things like that, on encouraging women to take a more active role in public life. When you look at the history of the WI, it was, when it was founded, it was before the women had the vote. And then it really took off after the First World War. And it was suffragists and suffragettes that really pushed it through. And early members, people like Margaret Wintringham, who was the first female MP to take a seat in Parliament. I think that's correct. She was a WI member. There's lots of good things that can come out and just encourage women's confidence. And I've seen that from WI friends that were very shy when they first joined and then eventually stepped up to be president of the local branch. It could really be a force for good in educating women and just civic responsibility, that kind of, really good volunteering, helping out.
I'm pleased that you've got still a vision of what you'd like the future to be, because I do think it's got a real place. I live in a rural area and a lot of women are in the WI, and it's a really good thing. There's lots of mixed sex organisations that these people could join. This specifically says for women.
Yeah, over Christmas, my aunt, I spent time with my mum and one of my aunts, and she's a member of the U3A. She's in a really vibrant London-based U3A, and I thought, well, that's what the WI will end up being. It won't be this special women-only organisation. It will just be another group. And along with, back in the summer, there was a thing about men's sheds had started letting in women. Point them to the WI, get them to set up their own WI. It's not difficult.
No, it's a great shame. Well, it's been absolutely fabulous talking to you and finding out about what's going on behind the scenes. It's nice to hear that there's a real pushback against what's happening. It sounds as though things will come out in the wash, let's say.
Yeah, I think that brings us to our final question, which is the same question we ask in every episode. Do you have a woman of the moment?
So it has to be all the ladies that took a punt on me and when we started the virtual reality WI. But if I had to name someone in particular, it would be Alison Jenner, who is everywhere. You might not know her name, but you'd know her face. She does the Ladies' Pond. She does the Lib Dem Voice for Women. She's helped out with this. She is just an absolute stalwart. She's brilliant.
She is a wonderful person. She also does brilliant podcasts. I like the Liberal Voice for Women podcasts. Yeah. They're really excellent.
Perfect pick. Great.
I was very grateful to the women of my local women's rights network when I joined them, and I've learned so much from them. I feel that my understanding and education has been turbocharged by exposure to great discussions with great women in my local women's rights network. So there's them. But because we've been so concerned with surrogacy lately and looking into that, I'd say Helen Gibson of Surrogacy Concern, because she's really raised awareness of this, and it seems like a one-woman powerhouse trying to raise awareness of what's happening about egg harvesting and the children created as a result of surrogacy. So at the moment, I think that she's just doing an amazing job. So Helen, of surrogacy concerned for me.
Well, thank you so much for coming and speaking to us. I know that this topic is on everybody's minds at the moment, especially the announcement and everything that's gone on in the past year with the Supreme Court ruling. So thank you very much for being our guest.
No, thank you for having me. It's been really nice.
Thanks very much.
Thank you to our listeners. We really hope that you've enjoyed this episode. And if you have, please do like, share, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff to help keep our channel growing and spread the word. Thank you.